Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Captain, and today I have here with me via Skype Peter Adkison, who, of course, is the founder of Wizards of the Coast, current owner of Gen Con, and is currently here to talk with me about his new upcoming YouTube fantasy series, The World of Chaldea. Hello, Peter. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Josh. Thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. So I want to jump right into it. So now the World of Chaldea, I've been watching a bunch of the previews and stuff that you have up on your YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Of course, and I am subscribed. There's a link down below for you guys to go over and subscribe. Now, is it true that all of the World of Chaldea, the background, the universe, as well as the storyline of the YouTube show is all entirely based both on a D&D setting you created yourself for a campaign you were running with your players back in the 1980s?
Yes, that's right. Chaldea is my homebrew Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I started in 1980, 1981, long in there. The memory gets a little foggy, and I've been GMing it ever since. I mean, you know, these things ebb and tide as to how much really, like during the 90s when I was at Wizards, why I didn't play as much as I play now. But I've GM'd other systems. I've used Burning Wheel and Fiasco, but mostly it's been a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. And the story is... the world and the story is all based on that with some changes.
Oh, very cool. Now I also understand it that one of the characters in your show, Giannis Octoni, their storyline is dedicated to one of your players who inspired their character?
Yeah, yes, that's right. Jonas Octoni, or Yo, as the player. So the player was a dear friend of ours named CJ, Cliff Jones, and he unfortunately passed away a few years back. And he's dearly missed, but he was just one of those players that everybody loved to play with. Everybody loved to carry. His character was full of bravado. You know, he would take on, you know, what GMs love, which is those characters that will take on tough challenges and inspire the other characters to go. And so yes, Jonas is based on it is that character.
So their storyline is totally based on the choices that CJ made in your campaign then. It was
the character is definitely his. When he gets to the story, you know, one thing about Dungeons & Dragons, and I hope you know, role players out there will forgive me for saying this, but you know, role playing game sessions don't tend to create great stories, really. You talk about narrative structure, what makes for a good story in a movie, in cinema, or in a novel. Most D&D games. So we had to take some creative license in terms of how to adapt his story to film. But it's definitely loosely based on the story on one of the campaigns. And we also had to go back and we talked to a lot of the players that have been in Chaldea for the last 40 years and said, you know, what stood out to you? Like what era, like what, because, you know, during 40 years of play, there's a lot of play, as you can imagine. And but everybody kind of agreed, there was this one campaign, you know, there's this one era that was kind of around in the mid 80s, which where there was you know, a plot that everybody really got pulled into and very interested in. So we went back to that.
Oh, very cool. So speaking about the campaign setting, what is it about the World of Chaldea that makes it very unique or different from, say, other D&D or role-playing settings?
Right. Well, I will say the setting will feel very familiar to most D&D players. I mean, we did not try to create a unique setting by making it as different from D&D or something. It'll feel very D&D like, very old school D&D. You know, it's got elves and dwarves and dragons and undead and stuff like that. We played a lot of power gaming in the 80s, so I think one thing that might, you know, we were back in high school and college, you know, one thing that might kind of set it apart a little bit from typical is just sort of the epic scale of things. Like we played high level characters. When we were told that, at some point you should retire the PCs when they get up to 20th level and ascend them and not play them, we were like, no. That's just when it's getting interesting. And so we played up into the divine ranks. And in fact, some of your viewers might be familiar with the very first Wizards of the Coast product ever printed, which is called the Primal Order, which is something Steve Conrad and I wrote, and Kim McLaughlin and a number of other people. We all worked on it. It was a big team. We were young. We didn't know what we were doing. It took a lot of work. But it was all about playing gods and working a system for playing gods that you could put into any sort of RPG campaign.
So then for the storyline, are we just jumping right in with epic level characters? Are these guys like level 20s challenging the leaders of the world kind of situation? Or
a little bit. I mean, not really all of them. I mean, Jonas starts off as pretty low level, but in fact, the Jonas backstory starts with him as a child because he had a really rough childhood, and we wanted to show that because it's so important in terms of making him who he is, a victim of domestic violence and stuff like this. And so we show some of that, and so we actually see him from a child, but he very quickly becomes someone who is like a capo in a thieves guild sort of level. And we do have in the Sarva story, the very first episode, she attacks a demigod and loses and and is as sort of the backstory for why she's on the lam running around with a bunch of white dudes when she's a Middle Eastern female character.
Fair enough. Now, one of the things I had read in your press release that you had sent out was that the orcs in your setting are based on Roman myth, and I was intrigued by this. I tried to do a little research, and the biggest thing I could come up with, which was something I kind of already knew about, was that the word orc comes from the god Orcus, which is, of course, the god of the underworld and broken oaths, for those who are not familiar. Is that where you took the background for your orcs from, and how did that inspire your orcs for the world?
Yeah, I think the fact that I think Orcus is cool. I mean, Orcus is one of those old school demon princes, out of the old monster manual. And so I always kind of liked him, the Wand of Orcus stuff. And the fact that it was Roman mythology. And there is some question as to whether the word orc really goes back to Orcus. And so the fact is there was really not much information. So for me, that made it a wide open sort of space. And I kind of wanted to distance myself from anybody who was concerned about Tolkien orcs, given some of the controversy that came out last year about all that. So so it was kind of a chance to just do something kind of fresh and different with orcs.
So what is different about your orcs in the world of Chaldea?
Well, they're not Tolkien orcs. I guess that's the thing that's different. They're subterranean. They're nocturnal. Because they're subterranean, they don't have a color to their skin. Their skin is white.
Oh.
So there's no pigmentation in their skin. They don't like to be out during the daylight. So that ends up being, it's a pretty significant weakness for an army. So thought a lot about how do you make an army of subterranean creatures come out onto the surface and be effective. And so, had some magic, some technology, big tents, stuff like that. So
very much doubling down on the whole underworld theme then with them.
Yeah.
Very going into that. Very cool.
Right. Well, and they are ruled by an elder dragon. So they are also and I guess we just really tried to make them pretty badass. I mean, the orcs are kind of the cannon fodder of D&D. They're like the bowling pins that you roll over, I'd say if there's anything we made different about the orcs is that we say, okay, those bowling pin orcs you can just kill easily. Those are like the cannon fodder orcs, right? They're trained orcs that are much tougher, and there's a whole military structure, and there's a guy at the top who's works for a dragon. And so, just I think more about giving them sort of the respect that you need for a good foe. Heroes are only as good as the villains they go up against.
So less cannon fodder, more boogeymen. I like that. They should be scarier. I'm with you on that. Actually, I do like that. Yeah. Also, I was looking into. I love that a lot of the different cultures you're working on in the world of Chaldea are based on real world cultures. You have
Oh,
people based on the Romans, you have people based on the feudal Japanese, and of course, and it's obviously going to be an important part, is you have people based on the Babylonians.
yeah.
And now I happen to be a little familiar with ancient history, and the word Chaldeans stuck in my mind, and I went, that was a real people, wasn't it? And I went and double checked. And sure enough, they were a real people who at one point had conquered Babylon, which was something
Right.
I did not recall. And then suddenly it all clicked for me, and I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So what is the connection to the real world Chaldeans to the name of your world?
Yeah, it's I certainly took the name out of history, and I took the I was intrigued with the idea of, for some reason, that story kind of grabbed me when I was pretty young, like that this place called Chaldea in I think around the 7th or 8th century BC was kind of where modern day Kuwait is, as best I can tell on the map. And this line of Babylonian kings came out of this group, and there's also the city of Ur, and that just
Yes.
sounds good, like the city of Ur.
Yes.
Does it take much to spark the imagination of a young boy, right? So that's kind of where it started. Not much more cleverness to it than that. But of course, for our story, as we decided to make this into a more professional thing than my homebrew campaign, we came up with a bigger story for this that I can't reveal too much at this point.
I understand.
Yeah.
Now, does the city of Ur actually play a part in the show?
Not yet.
I was just, I got excited when you mentioned that because, of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
the city of Ur has an incredibly important part in gaming history, being that the oldest board game still played in the world is the royal game of Ur.
Right.
So suddenly that made me tingle all over when you started saying the city of Ur.
Yes. I like you. I'm a big fan of Middle Eastern history. So we drew upon a lot of mythology and history from not only the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, of course, and we have a kingdom based on pre-Islamic Arab culture, and yeah, I love the Middle East. Just fantastic, a sandpit to play in. No.
I'm definitely with you. I think it's unfortunately too overlooked in gaming nowadays. They should go more into the mythology, definitely, of the Middle East. I'm with you, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things, talking about ancient real world compared to your universe in the world of Chaldea, that I was very intrigued by, is so you have this background storyline involving a god emperor. And of course, many emperors throughout history have claimed divine ancestry, have claimed to be gods themselves. And your world has an actual, real god emperor who dies in the
That's right.
backstory.
That's right.
And then you get to explore that. So what was your inspiration for that? Because that's a brilliant storyline. I absolutely love that.
Oh, thank you. So the inspiration for it. Wow. So here's where I took some liberty from what the way the campaign played as an RPG versus the way we decided to retell a story set here, which was like back in my old campaign, I had somebody asked me once, like, well, has there ever been one warrior who was so powerful that he was able to take over the whole world? And I said, oh yeah, and I think I just kind of made it up off the spot that thousands of years ago there was this guy named Cordava, and he took over the whole world. He was a demigod of Set, and he ruled, and then he ruled the world for a long time, and then he got assassinated, and nobody knows why. I mean, literally, I think I made all that up in this conversation with this player, but it became like this, like it grabbed me and it grabbed the players of like, wow, this who was this guy? How did he do that? And then how did he die? And so that mystery, I ended up sort of, playing fast and loose with the timelines and decided to like squish the thousands of years into no years and make that the setting. I started GMing period for a little while. I started a group like, hey, let's go back in time several thousand years and run a campaign set when this guy was emperor, and that's how I like to learn what my campaign is about, to just start running it. I think a lot of GMs do that. Like I'm just going to start running a campaign set in this time, and it's going to force me to develop that part of history, right? And so that's where it came out of. And so the mystery is very much a mystery within the story that I'm telling now, with this adventure, this endeavor, is who was this guy? How did he die? And so this guy is like he dies right at the beginning of our series, and there's a lot of mystery as to who did it.
Very cool. I like how you decided to go do the big prequel in the middle of your game. That was wow. I might steal that actually for my game.
Absolutely. We all inspire each other as best we can, right? No, very few of us have a truly original idea, right? And this is the collaborative nature of our industry, the collaborative of Dungeons and Dragons, and by all means.
So let's see. So I've been watching a bunch of the previews, and obviously I gather the primary format that you've chosen to go with for the world of Chaldea is a motion comic. But of course you do have some inserted live action scenes, and some of them have been showing up in the previews, which look really cool. So like what is the ratio of motion comic to live action in the show roughly?
Right. So we're releasing over the next 3 months. We'll be releasing eight chapters, including the prologue, and 2 of those chapters will have a live action section. So so only 2 out of the 8. And each of those is only going to be sort of in the 7 to 10 minute sort of range. It's not nearly as much as, honestly, it's not nearly as high a percentage as I would like. It just turns out it's really expensive to make live action films. And, film productions are expensive anyway. And then fantasy is the most expensive genre because it's a period piece plus magic and monsters. I mean, I guess science fiction is comparable. Yeah. And I don't I didn't want to do anything campy. I rather do, a 5-minute, really high quality film, 10-minute film versus 1 hour where we cut lots of corners and don't pay people and, crap like that. So, that's all I got.
Fair enough. So roughly how long are the episodes going to be?
They're in the range of 35 to 45 minutes generally, because it's YouTube and there's the flexibility to be however long we want them. I think chapter 4 with Marco is only like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and the prologue is about 15 minutes, and I think one of the chapters is almost an hour. So
fair enough. So what made you decide to go predominantly with the whole motion comic format? I mean, aside from what you had already talked about with how expensive it is to do it live action, but say motion comic versus, say, animation or something like that.
Oh, right. Sure. I think it was just first of all, cost was a big part of it. And that's why it's not all live action film, right? Because it's just too expensive to do that. So we had to, very early on, we were like, this story we want to tell, and given how expensive it is to do film, there's no way we're going to film this whole thing. Like, so what do we do? And so we came up with this idea of doing motion graphics because I think it plays to our strength as directors of fantasy art. Steve Conrad and I have worked with a lot of fantasy artists over the last 30 years, since starting with Wizards of the Coast in 1990, and haven't done much animation. And so I think that was I think animation felt a little too foreign for us, and the motion graphics idea we felt hasn't been that explored. I mean, we thought, well, first of all, it's also cheaper than animation too. Yeah. So it was just it was what we thought was sort of the nicest thing we could do. I mean, the nicest, not like, oh, I'm such a nice guy, but no, just like what would look good
Hmm.
And then also we did with this a full sound treatment though. So even though the motion graphics is the visual, the audio is all voiceover recordings of actors performing lines in the studio. We have an original score. We have sound effects because the audio portion of a film is just a fraction of the cost of the video portion of the film. So the audio is, I think, as good as a movie.
Hmm. I personally, by the way, I just a little side note, I happen to really like the audio comic format. It,
Thank
in a
you.
weird way, kind of reminds me of the old um, Star Trek animated series, which I like grew up on. I absolutely adored that
Right.
show because that they kept that mostly still. They'd move like one arm at a time, and so I get like a nostalgic glee out of the whole motion comic format. So I definitely am with you on this one for sure. Now, the current release schedule is you're going to have the prologue as well as chapter one on the 20th, which
Right.
is tomorrow from our filming
Right.
of this interview. I'm going to actually try to have this video up today, so it will be tomorrow from the release of this video. And then you're planning to have a couple more episodes each month up through March. Um, if this does well, are there any plans to possibly see future seasons or
Oh
side
yeah, yeah, yeah,
stories?
yeah. Yeah, this is a big epic story, Josh. I don't like. I'm going to be working on this until I die. I'm pretty sure. Like, not to be morbid about it, but what a way to go out. So Steve and I, we've committed to doing this for the long term. There will be multiple seasons. It's a big, big story. We're just starting to get things boiling in this world by the time the last chapter comes out. So yeah. Yes, tomorrow, December 20th is the first, the prologue in chapter one. We'll have another chapter every other week until all 8 chapters up through chapter 7 have been released. And then we also have, in the intervening weeks, we have director's commentary versions of all the chapters as well. So on the 20 and 7 is 27, but 1 is 28. On the 28th, we will have the prologue chapter and chapter 1 released with director's commentary, and we'll have other stuff too.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to the commentaries. I love watching those. Those are great.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
so now, obviously, this is inspired by a role-playing group, and this is a setting originally that you had created to run in Dungeons and Dragons. You later ran it in Burning Wheel and have gone through other systems. If this is successful, is it? And I also, obviously, I know you have contacts at Wizards of the Coast. Is it possible we may see a role-playing game product on this, maybe its own role-playing game, or possibly a setting book, say for Burning Whale, D&D, or maybe one of the retro D&D edition clones?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Our certainly would love to see that happening. My goal is to focus on story, and uh, we need to build an audience. We need to build a fan base, people who like the story. And if we do that successfully, and if there ends up being enough people that subscribe and watch this and stay with us, and uh, then I think then I can take that and I can license it to an RPG publisher, and be happy to do that when the time is right.
Very
I'm not,
cool.
but I'm not going to publish it.
Oh,
I'm done publishing. I don't ever want to carry a piece of inventory again in my life.
you say that now until you do.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, is there anything else that I haven't thought to ask you about that you'd like to share with the viewers about the world of Chaldea?
Oh, let's see. I should have you're always supposed to have like that final zinger at the end of something they had. I will say, well, you mentioned the real world history tie-in.
Mm.
All of the human kingdoms of Chaldea are inspired by some real world place and time, but we do take a lot of liberties. I don't want somebody to think that we've tried to master, say, Babylonian history
Hmm.
and have every detail down. At the end of the day, it's a fantasy world. We love identifying where are our cultural touchstones, but then we go in and mess with it and add a lot of our own stuff as well.
Inspired by, not a historical lesson.
Yes, inspired by yes, very important part of our messaging.
So I'd also like to ask you, if that's all right, a bit about your time with Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, sure.
So now, obviously, I mean, I feel like I'd be missing an opportunity if I didn't get to ask you about your time with Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, etc. So back when you started Wizards of the Coast and published Magic the Gathering, at what point did you realize that you had such a mega hit on your hands with Magic the Gathering?
Well, it happens in stages because you go from thinking, wow, I really like this game. I hope I want to publish it, to like, wow, this game is helping me raise money because, before it's published, people are wanting to invest in this. And then it comes out and you're like, have a really exciting Gen Con when we released it. And everybody's like, but in each of these steps, are still tiny steps compared to where it got to, right? And so it's not like you one day realize way over here. It happens in steps. And so I think the probably the one day that was the most important was like launching Magic the Gathering at Gen Con in 1993 and seeing it sell out and seeing people everywhere playing it. That was really exciting. And I flew back to Seattle the next day and quit my job at Boeing.
I'd say that was the moment then. That was definitely the moment.
And my dad was really upset at me. It's like, Boeing has a 401k. What are you doing?
Did he come around later?
Yeah, he did. He came around. He was stationed in Korea at the time, and so I flew out to Korea. I think it was at least Arabian Nights was out, so it was early '94. I said, Dad, we haven't seen each other in a few years. Let me fly out there and see it. I flew out to Korea, and I taught him how to play Magic the Gathering, right? So, because he's a gamer. I was a gamer because my dad, we learned about gaming together. And he's like, wow, this game is really good. Okay, son, I think you did the right thing.
That's awesome. That is so great. So when Richard Garfield originally brought you the idea, I saw in a previous interview you had actually done with Richard on your fireside chats.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Love that show, by the way. Great stuff. So I was watching that, and I saw that when he originally brought the idea to you, he didn't actually have the theme of Magic the Gathering on it yet. He just kind of had the rough idea of it being a customizable card game. Everybody didn't have to have the same cards. They didn't have to have the same decks. When he first brought you in that first meeting, you guys were in the garage discussing it. Did he have the idea of a trading card game already hammered out, or where did that come from? At what point did that get added to the mix?
He had what I would think of as a trading card game. The concepts of a trading card game were all in that initial euphoria. He had some sort of eureka moment, right? And it was hiking up near Noma Falls, I believe, where these elements of what a trading card game are, that there's lots and lots of cards and they're packaged in different ways, and everybody has their own deck, and you pick which cards are in your deck, and you and your deck against your opponent and his or her deck. So these ideas were all there. He just hadn't put he hadn't actually designed it yet, right? I mean, you can imagine, because what I just described is true of every trading card game. Right? That's true of Pokemon. It's true of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's true of Legend of the Five Rings, right? So that step from concept to design was what he did later. Yeah, I think that answered your question.
Yeah, no, definitely, okay, definitely.
Right. Sometimes when you're being interviewed, somebody asks you a question and you start blah 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 blah, and you're like, hey, what was the question? Did I really answer?
Oh no, you answered it and then some. That was great. No, fantastic for me, totally. I was a little background. I just feel like throwing in. I was one of those kids who got really into Magic the Gathering in 1993, and then I was in there for the whole trading card boom that followed. And there were so many other games that just came and went. Of course, yes. Magic just stayed through everything. Had that, it was like a rock. There were a few others that really had the staying power, but you guys published quite a few other games that unfortunately disappeared. And I say unfortunately because I played just about all of them, and they were good. Now, if you could pick one of those games to have stuck around and still be in print with the same basic rules that they had way back in the 1990s, which one would you have chose to to have stuck around and still be out there.
You mean aside from Magic the Gathering?
Aside from Magic the Gathering, yes.
Because I really do think that Richard somehow nailed it right out of the gate. I mean, like the Magic is, well, I think that if it was one of our games, I would probably go with Jihad or Vampire Eternal Struggle, depending which name.
I played it under Jihad.
Yeah. Yes. If it's a non-Wizards game, then definitely Legend of the Five Rings. I've got some good stories I could tell about L5R too.
This whole universe is based on a D&D game you made. So what was it like for you when Wizards of the Coast, with you at the helm, bought TSR?
Oh my God. I mean, that was like the best day of my life. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Magic the Gathering, but my heart belongs to Dungeons and Dragons, and so it was great. Yeah, that was every gamer's dream come true. It certainly was for mine, and also the best possible circumstances of doing that, because Dungeons and Dragons was on hard times because of some challenges on the business side. And so it was the opportunity to not only buy Dungeons and Dragons, but save Dungeons and Dragons from, an unknown fate. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons wouldn't have gone away. You can't kill something. That brand is too valuable. Somebody would have done something great with it. But the uncertainty was not good for the industry. So, yeah, that was a wonderful time, and magical.
So then, of course, later you eventually sold Wizards of the Coast to Hasbro, but after that, Hasbro sold you back Gen Con. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, according to what I found, you sold Wizards of the Coast in 2002 and then bought Gen Con. Bought Gen Con back in 2002. My mistake. And then in 2003 is when you moved Gen Con to Indianapolis. And since that time, wow, Gen Con has just like grown in leaps and bounds. Attendance numbers, money it brings in every year, exploded. So what would you say are some of the factors that you think were the biggest in contributing to, the incredible growth of the convention?
Well, I think internal. I'll give ourselves credit for one factor, and then the other factor was an external credit. I think the internal credit was that it became a company that had nothing else to do but Gen Con, right? Gen Con became a company well-financed because I put a lot of my own money into it. Anything that we needed, we just bought it and made the investments that were necessary. And we were a business without any other distractions. This is what we're going to do, is we're going to run this show and do that thing. But then the external factor that I think was much more important was that, starting around 2007, 8, long in there somewhere, the geek wave, the growth of tabletop gaming and geekdom, started with people like, I don't know when it started, it's a curve, but, celebrities coming out as D&D fans like Vin Diesel and Will Wheaton, shows like that. And then eventually on social media and Twitch and now it's mainstream. Dungeons and Dragons is mainstream. And that's amazing. And by the way, I understand not everybody likes that. I'm someone who loves the fact that Dungeons and Dragons is mainstream, and it's been very good for my business as well. So
that's fair enough. So now, unfortunately, 2020 has been the year with no conventions, and that, of course, is for good reason. There's nothing we can do about it. But we're all hoping that some of the signs we're getting right now that 2021 may be getting back to normal. And we're really hopeful for that. If it does, and we really hope it does, my fingers are crossed, do you guys have anything special planned for Gen Con 2021?
Yeah. Well, we have announced that we are having a Gen Con 2021, but we have no real idea what it's going to be like at this point. I mean, we're flying, we don't have any secret knowledge about how quickly the country's going to get vaccinated and to what extent by August. So the nature of the show, we will have to develop the nature of the show over the next few months based on the science and how things happen. Worst case scenario, it's a really crazy social distancing show. Like maybe I'm not speaking, I'm not in the management of Gen Con these days, so I'm on the board. I show up for photo ops. I mean, that's my role at Gen Con. But but you could imagine a worst case scenario where the convention center is just the exhibit hall and all the booths are spread way out, so there's lots of distancing between booths and super wide aisles and stuff. Or maybe a lot of people will be vaccinated and it'll be a lot closer to a normal show. We just don't know yet.
That is fair enough. I'd like to be optimistic, but I also understand that you have to be realistic. So yeah. that is how these things go. So before I let you go, I definitely want to thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to this interview. And before I let you go, I'd like to ask, do you have any last thoughts, anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
Oh, wow. Anything else? Well, first of all, thank you. You're welcome, but thank you for interviewing me on your channel because, of course, I'm out trying to spread awareness of this thing. So it's really, you're the one that did me the favor. So I think what do I want to share? I love this story. I haven't mentioned Steve Connard much in this interview. Steve Connard is my business partner, creative partner. He was a co-founder of Wizard of the Coast. He played in Chaldea way back in the 80s, and we've been in several businesses together. He deserves a huge amount of credit for a lot of the work that he's the lead writer. He's the art director. It's so, and this story means a lot to us. We think it's a lot of fun. It's edgy. It's violent. It's a little bit more on the adult side. It's not for the faint of heart. It's like old school D&D. It's what it's like.
Well, that is awesome. Again, I just want to mention to anyone watching, the prologue and chapter 1 are going to be up on December 20th, 2020. There are links to the YouTube channel down below. Go over, subscribe, check it out. And the rest are coming every 2 weeks all the way up through March. So, again, thank you so much, Peter, for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, anytime. Anytime you want to come on the Board Game Captain, you let me know.
All right.
And
thanks, Josh.
For everybody else at home, you guys have a great one and game on.
That's right. Game on, definitely.
So I like your backdrop. Is that a bit of artwork from the show, or?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Well, not so much from the show. It's from the world. Okay. It's the mountain of Denorium, which is where the capital for. There's kind of a little the other side. Yeah. There's a little mountain fortress there that's I'm kind of blocking, but it's a fortress that you can only get to through flight. You can't. I mean, you'd have to be quite a mountaineer to get there.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and so the Tavia is a kingdom that is they have winged lions for mounts in their military, and
cool.
It's kind of a Viking themed kingdom, but instead of going out on boats, they go out on winged lions and raid the neighbors.
Oh, very interesting.